Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone. Welcome to this very special edition of our show. Today is August 31st, 2022, and we are commemorating the 25th anniversary of the tragic passing of Diana, Princess of Wales. We all know that Diana was an extraordinarily luminous individual who touched the hearts and souls of billions of people, not only by radiating graciousness and charisma, but because of her unique healing energy. After her divorce from Prince Charles, Diana embarked on a journey of personal empowerment and spiritual development. To help fulfill her destiny, she actively sought out teachers, coaches, and mentors, one of the most important of whom is today's guest, who literally helped Diana find her authentic voice so she could shape and project her message of empathy, kindness, compassion, and love. Our guest was Diana's voice, presentation, and life coach. His wondrous and highly inspirational book, entitled Diana, The Voice of Change, has recently been updated in a brand new commemorative edition to mark the 25th anniversary of Diana's passing. The book explains how our guest helped Diana evolve from a fragile, bulimic victim to a dynamic, strong, uplifting woman in control of her life who became the universally adored queen of people's hearts. The book contains vocal, physical, and emotional techniques that Diana learned and that we can all use in our own journeys of empowerment and enlightenment. Our guest started out as an actor and teacher specializing in voice and theater studies. He was the head voice coach at the prestigious Webber Douglas Academy of Dramatic Art in London. And then, through a revelation, which he calls The Alchemy of Voice, which is also the title of his first book, his work took on a spiritual dimension as he learned to attune the personality of the voice with the breath of the soul. For many years, he served as the resident master of voice at the Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London and the head of voice at the Drama Centre London. He's been a coach for many prominent individuals in the political and corporate world, and he's worked with numerous well-known actors, including Vanessa Redgrave, Michelle Williams, Hugh Bonneville, Mark Rylance, and so many others. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Stewart Pearce to our show. Stewart, thank you so much for joining us.
It's slightly blushing to listen to all of that. Thank you for such concision. As one sees all of the years flooding before one, of all the extraordinary things that I've been fortunate enough to be part of and create. So thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here, Harvey.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. Stewart, everyone knows that Diana was not only captivating, she was able to permeate deep into people's souls with her magnetism and incandescence. Take us back to the first time you met her. What were your impressions of her?
Oh my goodness. It was a set up meeting. I didn't realize who I was going to be meeting. It was set up by a very dear friend of Diana's who happened to be a leading restaurateur in this city of London, where I am today, which has been my home for many years. And this particular lady called Mara Burney, who was really part of the cognoscenti of the literature world here, as well as being a restaurateur, said, there's somebody I want you to work with. And she had introduced me to a number of my leading clients. She was a great patroness of mine. And so I said, well, who is it? And she said, well, why don't you just come and have lunch? That was not difficult to do because her cooking was just extraordinary. And there's a great story that during the heyday of the Rolling Stones, that after a concert here in the United Kingdom, they would call Mara and say, Mara, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, but will you create spaghetti for us? And she would get up and cook, a meal for the boys. And everybody enjoyed her cooking. However, so she said, would you please come? Which I did, of course, for lunch. And as I entered the restaurant, I said to the head waiter, where is Madame? Oh, she's downstairs. And I said, who's she with? You'll see when you get there. So it was all being set up all the way along the line. As I got to this salon privé, this private room, I knocked on the door, opened it, walked in, and there was Mara and Diana, who grabbed hold of my arm and said, you will work with me, won't you? And so I said, well, of course, but I've been set up. But of course. And what I was met by is this extraordinary, vulnerable, frail, but immense beauty that I was completely staggered by. I mean, in that moment, as it were, I almost fell in love. It was just the most extraordinary feeling. And Diana and I got on like a house on fire, so very immediately I said absolutely yes. I had actually been asked to work with her a year before when she was in the middle of the crisis of the circus, the paparazzi, and the whole substance of her eventual liberation from the British royal family. And I said that I didn't feel that I could serve her because of the nature, as you were saying earlier in the introduction, that so many people had worked with her, both in alternative or complementary therapies, as well as within those that are recognized as being psychological interventions. And a number of them had gone to the daily papers and had sold their story. And that was something that I was not going to get caught up in the sense of that she was scarred by betrayal. So, in acknowledging on this occasion that I would work with her, the destination for the relationship was that it was to be completely confidential. And so she always came to me. I never went to Kensington Palace. And whenever she needed me, she called me on her cell phone.
What did Diana want from you?
She came to me after the Martin Bashir interview for BBC Panorama, and although she felt vindicated and liberated by what she'd said, at the same time she didn't enjoy the physical presence of her being. She felt submissive, she felt overly frail. There are three people in this marriage, this very, very light voice. And so she wanted me to provide her with a voice of weight, a voice of gravitas, a voice of center, a voice of earth, which she had recognized through some of the other people that I'd worked with, such as, I'd worked with Margaret Thatcher in the early 80s. I was the man who gave Mrs. Thatcher her voice.
When you look at Diana's emotional state at the time of her divorce, you described her as living in what you called the captivity of diminishment. She felt extremely betrayed not only by her husband, but by the entire royal family and their employees, and by the media and the paparazzi. So I would think she must have had huge trust issues. Did you find that?
Oh, huge, yes. Absolutely huge.
So, Stewart, your role as Diana's coach was to help Diana transform into a confident, empowered public persona with physical and emotional gravitas, and to convey what you called personal sovereignty. What was the most important aspect of your assignment in working with her?
Her voice, very literally. Our voices are at the very core of our beings. And if we're feeling very troubled within, our voices always show it. They are the mirrors to our soul. And so this is where, over the years, my practice has been not just physical, because our voices are purely physical means that we use to communicate the way we think and the way we feel, but it's also dealing with the level of empowerment within. For example, if we're feeling very tense in public speaking situations, the first thing that's impaired is our breath. And as a result of not being able to breathe freely, we automatically feel very contracted or very diminished. So the first thing that I needed to do was to open up Diana's breath so that she could actually feel it literally moving through her and positioning her voice, positioning her sound, which automatically provides us with a sense of gravitas within the body, a sense of literally possessing the body. And for Diana, this wasn't that difficult because she was very sportive. So she swam every day. She was a water baby, so she swam 25 lengths every day. She worked out at the gym. She was very aware of the physical culture of her body and therefore was a sensualist. She was very tuned into her sensuality. And being the sensitive that she was very aware of the hypersensitivity within. What I needed to do was to find a way of getting the butterflies to fly in formation. So I reintroduced her to flow. And as a result of reintroducing her to flow, she felt grace moving through her. It wasn't that it was a paucity of grace to begin with. It's just that from a physical point of view, she was diminished. And by engaging in the flow of her breath and the flow of sound, she automatically came back into the wonder that she was.
Diana passed away in 1997, and you wrote the book in 2020, more than 20 years after her death. Why did you wait so long to write the book, Stewart?
It wasn't really a question of waiting so long, although, as you see, that there is this time span. It was much more to do with when will the book, if indeed it was to be written and printed, when would the book be most useful to the women of the world? After all, Diana was an iconic liberator of the divine feminine principle. And we saw her break away from the patriarchy, from the establishment, in a way that no other woman had done before. And I mean, I think it was Sarah Ferguson who commented, the Duchess of York, who commented, very few women leave the royal family without losing their heads. And that was sort of going back into history. And of course, as we know, through all the reportage that took place at that time, that Diana was really criticized extensively. She's as thick as two short planks, etc., etc. And the point was that Diana was an intuitive intelligence. She wasn't a cerebral intelligence, and had always been diminished as a result of not being able to fit into the conventions, the mores, the academic brilliance that so many people in the world have achieved, which is something that I personally recognize, because it was something that I always found very difficult to move into the academic activity of our lives. I'm an intuitive, I'm an organic being that has discovered, in the way of being an autodidact, of learning through the wonder of life, how I can be of use to all of my clients, to humanity, if you like. And so along came this remarkable process that took place around 2014, 15, 16, where a number of my female clients in Hollywood were feeling that they needed to step forward and to express the way that they'd been maltreated by men. And particularly, there are a number of men that we know of, whose names I won't mention, but we know of. For example, one of the leading Hollywood moguls who had abused the people that I'm talking about, the women that I'm talking about. And one of them said to me, "But you worked with Diana, and all the information that you've given me, I have a feeling is based on the wonder of what Diana was all about. Why don't you write a book about her?" So it came at that moment of #MeToo. And I began to see the purpose of it and relived so much of what we had exchanged, Diana and I, during the last year of her life. I mean, the last meeting that we had, she said completely in passing, "Wouldn't it be wonderful if we wrote a book about what we've been through together? But let's not do it until the boys are married." I mean, it was completely en passant. Diana was immensely intuitive, and so that process fitted in absolutely with the natural effervescence of her spirit. So I remembered all of this because her passing for me was deeply traumatic, as it was for so many of us.
Oh,
And it took me at least 7 or 8 years to recover from the deep, deep, deep grieving of her passing. At the same time, in honor of the fact that what she did in her passing was to awaken the hearts and, if you like, the minds or the souls of so many people. 3.9 billion people wept during the 7 days when the world stood still.
you wrote in your book that Diana faced enormous opposition, disdain, and stonewalling from the British royal family because she created a new way of being that contradicted the protocols of tradition, which required them to maintain a stoic royal veneer. Stewart, do you think that Diana permanently changed the British monarchy?
Oh, unquestionably. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it was a crisis point for Her Majesty and other senior members of the family. And so they're sensitive, intelligent people who took on board all of the innovations that Diana was bringing forth and applied them in her own way. And of course, we now see in the annals of history what William and Harry have done, particularly Harry, in the same thing beginning to happen to Meghan Markle, his wife, and realizing that the only way this could be resolved was by literally making a protest and stepping away. The level of courage that took, and particularly in the face of the vilification of the British press, it was quite enormous. But nobody has considered that Harry, at the beginning of his relationship with Meghan, decided, through her suggestion, that he needed to go into psychotherapy because he evidently had not come to terms with the vastness of the way that the death of his mother had affected him. So he was harboring huge amounts of personal rage, which is always self-evident in someone who is grieving very profoundly but doesn't know how to express it. And so as a result of going into in-depth psychotherapy, the first tool of which is transparency, honesty, integrity, he moved into uncovering the firmament of what he was all about and all of these held-back emotions. And as a result, that really stimulated him. It maneuvered him into needing to be transparent with the family. And so the rest is history.
Stewart, you wrote about the three G's that shaped Diana's personality: gentleness, gratitude, and generosity. If I may, I'd like to add a fourth G: graciousness. She was one of the most gracious human beings the world has ever seen, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And you see, those three elements are really the emanations of grace. So, as my book says, the prima facie state was the fact that she actually was in possession of grace. We know that she had this sense of flow and ease and graciousness and gracefulness about her. But she was also really in touch with what she felt were spiritual forces. And of course, we know grace is really an emanation of source energy. It's an emanation of the divine. And those people that carry grace are those people that are invested with divine energies.
Oh, absolutely. You wrote in your book that when you looked at the choices that Diana made in the last 2 years of her life, you described her as courageous and even daring. You suggested in your book that by going public about her husband's infidelity and specifically his long-standing affair with Camilla, Diana was a forerunner to the Me Too movement. Is that because she was a role model for other women who've been victimized in some way by men?
Absolutely, yes. Hence my allusion earlier on. Absolutely. Yes, I mean she was an extraordinary figure, wasn't she? This very alone individual who evidently was a force to be reckoned with from her courage and impetuosity. She moved on instinct. She was not a cognitive individual. She moved purely on. When I say she was not a cognitive, I didn't mean. What I mean is that she didn't weigh up all of her choices. She worked purely through spirit. She worked purely through instinct. And so nobody knew about that revelation that you've just mentioned of, well, there are three people in this marriage. Nobody knew that she was going to commit herself to that. Diana knew and had given Martin Bashir warning during the interview that something like that possibly might happen. But she moved on instinct, she moved on impulse. And of course, we know sometimes that can move us into areas of great jeopardy. On this occasion, what it did was to awaken millions of people to the possibility of what the next level of change needed to be so that we could all move into our hearts. I mean, Diana called us back to our humanity. She called us back to love. The voice of change is the voice of love. That's what she called us back to.
When Diana died, we were plunged into the largest global grieving in modern history. 3.5 billion people, over half the world's population, watched the funeral. You wrote, and I'm quoting you here, you wrote that people throughout the world were transformed from a literal state of being into a metaphysical reality. Stewart, are you saying that something identifiable actually changed in our consciousness?
I believe so, yes. I definitely believe so. In the way that we were changed by other tragic events in modern history. I mean by that going back to 9/11. I mean going back to the awful death of Bobby Kennedy, of JFK, of Martin Luther King. These are also iconic figures. And something changes within us. I mean, I believe that when Queen Elizabeth passes, we will see something else. We will see an archetypal wave of force that will again surprise us. Certainly, the British people, the United Kingdom, moved into a collective nervous breakdown when Diana passed.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. And you mentioned we were calibrated into a new way of being. And you said that it takes only 11% of the population to change mass consciousness.
Offered by social science, not my statistics.
You said that after Diana died, she became a spiritual force with an otherworldly power to revitalize the hearts and souls of people all over the world. Stewart, how do you know that?
Because I was with her and saw the effect that she had on human beings. A little known fact is the fact that Diana once or twice during the week, when she was free, would get into her car in this city of London and would drive to a hospital, park the car, walk into reception and say, is there anybody that I need to sit with? Is there anybody who needs my company? Can you imagine that there you are working as a humble receptionist in hospital administration, and in walks this beautiful woman, looking very casual, of course, dressing down, not wearing a party frock, saying, is there anybody I can help?" So there were people to, not just to enumerate the process of what I'd experienced with Diana, but also to investigate the effect that she had on people. There were a number of people who I interviewed who wanted to remain nameless, who said to me, "When she touched me, a force moved through me. Was she an angel?"
Well, I want to tell you something, Stewart. In 1983 or 84, Diana came to Toronto with her husband, Prince Charles. And during that tour, she broke away from protocol on her own, had her driver take her to an AIDS hospice. This was off the schedule. There were no media present. I knew about this because I was a volunteer there. And she wanted to meet with each victim of AIDS. This was unheard of at the time. As you well know, there was such a stigma. And she completely transformed everyone there. I wasn't there because we were not allowed. But the next day, I heard all about it. So I wrote Diana a letter telling her that I'm a gay man. I've lost almost half my friends. I don't have AIDS myself, but I'm petrified of it. And I wanted her to know what it meant to everyone that she went there. And she sent me a beautiful photograph signed to me. And so that was my little Diana experience.
Amazing. And again, an emanation of grace.
Oh, hugely. You often refer to Diana as having been anointed. What does that mean?
That she had been chosen from an archetypal force, that extraordinary supernatural force that we see existing in our world, which comes from the sacred zone, from the sacred context, where we see certain people are invested with a certain energy, and they often arise out of very humble situations, and they step forward and they become a luminescent, radiant being that creates extraordinary effect in the world. Mother Teresa, for example, a contemporary saint, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I mean, these are people who are dedicated and devoted to their religious path or their spiritual path. But, looking into anointment, for example, that is taken from the experience of Queen Elizabeth II being anointed by oil during one of the most sacred parts of the coronation ceremony, which was the only part that wasn't filmed. And this oil goes all the way back into the history of King Solomon's temple. The oil is placed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, i.e., the high priest, onto the brow, the breast, and the hands of the monarch. And in that moment, they become a high priest or a high priestess. They are anointed with oil. And this was something that we recognized with, Diana and I recognized that she was called to a level of service, which meant that she was a world servant, that her cause would thenceforward would become literally a world servant to the humanitarian causes of the world.
Now, looking more specifically at your work with Diana, how important was it for her to learn to love herself?
Oh, I mean, hugely. I mean, if we don't love ourselves, then automatically we're caught in the terrible binding of self-tragedy. So my job was to, through love, through belief, faith, and trust in her, was to remind her of who she truly was rather than what she had become, which was a vessel of great victimization. Diana felt that she was victimized, but she never saw herself as being a victim. She always took full responsibility for her position and therefore what she needed to do about it, and was highly intrigued by all of the burgeoning consciousness in the early 80s and early 90s of spirituality in the world, what we used to call the New Age movement. So she was very familiar with this, with a lot of people can dismiss as being woo-woo, but for her it was actually looking into the very single tenet, which is do as you would be done by. So if we have mutual respect and common decency, it means that we're moving into love. So what we need to do if we're going to spread that love is to start loving self.
You wrote about a concept called enlightenment. You said that within our being is a love that can direct you to think and feel in ways that reflect and attract all the love you want. So, Stewart, how does a person with low self esteem achieve enlightenment?
Well, the difficulty when we're in low self esteem and we feel very diminished is that we're terrified. And generally speaking, we're terrified because we're not in connection with the source that will always give us succor, that will always allow us to feel that we're filled with grace, and that will always allow us to feel that there is an energy that we can feel safe and secure by. And I'm talking about the source, I'm talking about the divine, I'm talking about, if you like, what we used to call God. I mean, whatever word we wish to use. There is a remarkable, miraculous force within our universe and within us. To think that, Harvey, a sperm and an ovum ignited, and now we call this person Harvey. Or a sperm and an ovum ignited, and now we call this person Diana, who unfortunately has passed, although her spirit, I believe, is very alive. I'm sitting in my study at the moment looking at two extraordinary trees, and to think that that huge tree grew from this single seed, and now here it, I mean, this is the miraculous nature of the universe, which is completely self-organizing and completely self-correcting if we lean into it. Those of us that are frightened have often been stymied by all of the manipulation and coercion of the patriarchal world. So we believed in another reality, which takes us into pain. And if we can start moving into bliss and delight, if we feel light moving through every cell of our bodies, and we have in our body over 100 trillion cells, if we feel lit up, this is what enlightenment means, because automatically we make choices that are fair and loving and kindly and gracious.
That's so beautifully said. You wrote a lot about the benefit of using positive affirmations to empower ourselves. And I'm a very strong advocate of using affirmations in building self esteem. I'm wondering whether your work with affirmations helped Diana overcome her bulimia.
Oh, I would say that working with the I am presence, working with I am powerful, I will use my power for the greater good, and the others that I list within the book, that they were the single demonstration of the movement that she felt, the currency that she felt moving from disempowerment into empowerment. Because it's a divine code. I am is a divine code that we can read about in all the mystical texts, and originally it was possibly given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and certainly Jesus Christ used them in all of his teachings in the Synoptic Gospels. So I am is being used hugely today. I'm using it with all of my clients whenever they need it. I am safe, I am secure, because looking at this time that we're living in, where there's great socioeconomic insecurity, we've just been through a global pandemic, all of our geopolitical regimes are quaking. If we don't feel unsafe and insecure at this time, I think we're probably sociopaths. The question is, what do we do with it? Am I going to stay perpetually in a state of insecurity and unsafety? Or am I going to see that I'm the master mistress of my own destiny and that I have within me all of the tools that I need through love to move from disempowerment into empowerment, from chaos into harmony, from dis-ease into ease, etc.?
Stewart, I was fascinated by what you wrote about Diana's very special friendship with Mother Teresa. There was definitely a strong spiritual connection between them, wasn't there?
Oh, huge, yes, huge. They knew one another.
You referred to the divine feminine within all of us. What is that?
It's an archetypal energy that we are part of within the supra nature of consciousness within our universe. There is a divine male, there is a divine feminine. More and more and more today, we're seeing, even in religious quarters, that God is both male and female. So when we talk about the archetypes, we're talking about keys into our consciousness. So the divine feminine is the element of that pure, loving, effervescent, totally in connection with the divine aspect of our beings. And what we're seeing in our world is a great rebalance of the way that men have ruled into sharing co-creativity and parity with the women of the world. There's still a great deal of injustice that needs to be healed, and the women need to be apologized to by us, by we men. But then, as a result of that, we see extraordinary proportions that we all share coming to the forefront of our consciousness.
Tell us about the Diana Hart path.
So the Diana Hart Park, yeah, this book is just the beginning of a project. There is another book that I'm in the process of planning at the moment with some remarkable interviews of people that have never stepped forward to reveal what their meeting with Diana was, starting with the priest who spent 6 hours with her dead body in Paris during that terrible night, who spent 6 hours in vigil with her and went through a redemptive process himself. So the book will be about the legacy and the memory of Diana. This is all part of developing a project which will be called the Diana Heart Path, which is essentially for the women and the men of the world, but for not the men and the women, for the women and the men of the world, where women can come together in communion to address all of the sensibilities, all of the sensitivities that they need to feel empathic union with others. So there's an element of communion, an element of co-creativity, and an element of constructive creativity or constructive therapy, where if we're going through, if a lady is going through a difficult situation in her life, she can call upon one of the therapists or one of the healers or one of the psychological advisors that we have to find ways of moving from negative into positive.
I just want to say that as a man, I found your book incredibly enlightening and empowering and healing. And so I don't want to convey the impression to people that the book is directed primarily to women, because all of the principles and all of the exercises you set out in that book are equally applicable to men, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I also know in my own experience of teaching these empowerment tools for the last 40 years that the majority of people who come to the work are the women. And
Why do
what
you
I
think that is?
Well, because we men are just slowly waking up to the fact that we can actually be loving and vulnerable at the same time, rather than being loving and machismo and, and constantly moving into those archetypal energies of wanting to thrust into the world, that we can actually find ways of sharing in parity. I have the majority of my leading clients are women, which is really interesting. Maybe that's also to do with honoring my gayness. And so what I mean by that is I feel that I have a balance of the yang energy, which is about moving through the world, but I also have a very yin balance within, or energies that balance out with my yang energy. So there are untold depths of sensitivity within me and great vulnerability. So I serve the women of the world so that the women can then teach we men how we can also open our hearts, because obviously it's scary to open one's heart. Well, you need a lot of courage. And if the women are emboldened, then automatically they can hold us in their arms whilst we open our hearts.
That's beautiful. That's all about nurturing. I love that. Now, you mentioned Prince Harry earlier. Do you see evidence in Prince William's behavior so far that he will carry on his mother's tradition of compassion and empathy when he becomes king?
Oh, unquestionably. I mean, he already is, isn't he? The very fact that there he was photographed the other day standing on a street's corner in this city and selling a magazine which is called The Big Issue, which all money that's generated through the sale of it goes to the homeless people. And there he was. Nobody knew who he was until they suddenly recognized, oh my God, it's Prince William, i.e., the heir apparent. So yeah, I mean, he does the most extraordinary things, and I feel also that much of this, Harvey, is how we embody these truths rather than just simply mark them. How we literally behave, and I feel that everything that we've seen in his character with his wife, Kate, and the children is the evocation of what Diana was all about: this pure love and gentleness.
If you could speak with Prince William and Prince Harry, what would you say to them?
Well done.
That's beautiful.
keep
Well,
keep going.
Stewart, I can't resist asking you whether you saw the Netflix series The Crown. Did you see it?
I did, yes. In fact, initially I was asked to work on it, and I had a job on Broadway, and I turned it down. But yes, I did.
What did you think of how Diana was portrayed?
by Emma Corrin.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I must say that part of me watched it to be ready in defense of Diana, and I realized that I didn't need to because I felt that Emma, bearing in mind that it's a drama and not a documentary, I felt that Emma gave them the most beautiful presentation, gave the most beautiful characterization of the sensitivity of Diana, the frailty of Diana, and at the same time, the way that she was trying to embolden herself through all of the varying experiences and techniques and awarenesses that she was developing. I thought it was rather beautiful.
So did I. I loved it. What about the movie Spencer starring Kristen Stewart? Did you see that?
Well, I felt that was the antithesis. I feel that Kristen is a really, really interesting young actress. But I felt that the director had really brutalized the energies, that there was nothing beautiful, elegant, or gracious about the movie, right down to the very score, which was so dissonantal. And from an intellectual point of view, I can sort of move into the argument of why he chose to do that. But this was not Diana at all. So I must say I did not enjoy the movie.
I want to mention to our viewers that to learn more about what we've been discussing, please visit www.dianathevoiceofchange.com. You can also learn more about Stewart Pearce, his workshops, consultations, retreats, and his other books by visiting his website, www.stewartpearce.com. Well, Stewart, it's been not only an honor to have you on our show, but it's been a real education as well. I greatly appreciate everything you've done to perpetuate and sustain and honor Diana's legacy and the many lessons that she taught us. Thank you so much for appearing on our show.
Hey, I mean, it's been cool. Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor. I loved Diana. I still love her spirit, and so if I can propagate this work and allow the people of the world to realize how it's much easier than they first intended it to be, meaning the substance of life, living the quintessence of life. So, thank you so much for seeing the book to be of interest, to be of value, and to be perhaps a changing principle in our lives as we move forward in this extraordinary world.
I absolutely think everybody should be reading this book because we can all utilize the lessons and the exercises that you've taught us. And we can also absorb a little bit of what Diana stood for, the kindness, the empathy, the compassion. We all need to keep that central in the way we conduct ourselves. So again, I thank you so, so much.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
Our guest has been renowned voice and presentation coach, spiritual teacher, and author, Stewart Pearce. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.